I am the prince of this city. You have violated my laws. I'm Matthew Dawkins.
And I'm Chris Spivey.
And I'm Eddie Webb, and today we're going to talk about most of Kindred the Embraced here on Genreless. Hello and welcome to, actually, we're pretty close to Halloween now by the time you're listening to this. So this has been our fun little October dive into horror, although that's increasingly questionable affectation for this run of shows.
Well, it's definitely horrific.
That's true. Matthew doesn't know this, but before this, we actually watched Forever Night, so we are primed for this level of vampire nonsense.
I mean, I'd just like to open by saying, I mean, this show is a fine example of how a well-written script, combined with avant-garde shooting, classically trained acting, and a robust, captivating background plot from one of the most popular role-playing games, doesn't yet exist on television. This, I mean, good God, this, I mean, I hate to ruin the lead, as it were, but this is a terrible show.
You're tipping your hand real early on this.
I know it's not a new report to think that, but watching this wasn't enjoyable, and further, it made me hate myself. And I think I'm probably going to use the word terrible a lot in this episode that you very kindly invited me onto. You could have had me on to discuss Farscape, Flash Gordon, The Leftovers, Lost Deadwood, The Wire. Any of these shows I've loved dearly, and instead I watch this shit.
It's because
thanks.
We want to challenge you to find a new word every single time that's not terrible.
Well, let's strain my vocabulary then.
Matthew has definitely tipped his hand a bit on this, but yes, normally when we invite a guest onto the podcast, it's to, hey, someone who really loves the show, so they can kind of talk about it. That's not what we did this time, because it would have been very difficult to find someone like that. But also, to be honest, it's a case of, this is very obviously a show based off Vampire the Masquerade. All three of us have worked on Vampire the Masquerade. So it's the let's talk about this show. We're going to talk about probably the RPG at some point in time. I will say, since we're starting off strong with this, my thesis for Kindred the Embraced is that yes, it is not good, but the reasons why it is not good, by fandom consensus, are usually the wrong reasons. A lot of reasons that people who are fans of Vampire the Masquerade say the show is bad are actually reasons why I think the show could have been okay. And also, I feel like this show is caught between two poles. If the show had been made 5 years earlier in either direction and a slightly different focus, it could have actually been a decent show. I feel like it was stuck between what had worked before and what it was trying to do, and just missing both spectacularly.
I would say the show would work even in the time period where it was made if it wasn't in the hands of Aaron Spelling, who was trying to make Vampire 9210 Beverly Hills.
Right.
It has a lot of those vibes sort of ingrained into the show. And then they said, you know what? Maybe if we added vampires in it, we could get some more sexiness, and that would bring more viewers in to watch it.
See, and I feel like it's failed because it tries too hard to incorporate too much from Vampire the Masquerade.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I've been essentially shitposting on my YouTube channel, making various Kindred the Embraced meme videos since watching this. There's 3 of there as of time of recording. I'm sure there will be more. And the common consensus from viewers is, lol, this show is trash. And I wish they'd tried harder to make it more like Vampire the Masquerade. And I
Right.
feel like that's actually incorrect. I think where it fails most consistently is when it tries to be Vampire the Masquerade. The fact that they are incorporating too broad a basket of themes. I mean, I know we will be going into some of the episodes in specific, but to use an example, and you can tell it's sort of pilot quality dialogue. Let's dump as much exposition and world building on the viewers as possible in one fell swoop. The sort of seneschal Primogen Archon all wrapped up in one character. Who kind of lingers around like a Richard O'Brien, Vincent Price character in the first episode, says at one point, "They are trying to provoke you to frenzy. They want you to expose your beast, and it's and let us go to the Haven and meet the rest of the kindred." Okay, how many terms from the lexicon that appears in every edition of Vampire the Masquerade can you throw in here?
Right.
Because, I don't know, is there some kind of quota that you have to hit with every episode to make it still be connected to Vampire?
But it's...
Oh, sorry, carry on. Sorry. Yes, you go ahead.
I'm trying harder not to interject, because Eddie has gotten used to it over the course of the past 2 years. But you're our guest. You're in our virtual home. I feel that I should give you 5 more minutes of grace.
Only 5.
Which means fuck me, but you're okay.
Yeah, the main issue, as Eddie will be able to attest from being on other podcast with me, with the Onyx podcast, is usually if I get started, especially if I start ranting, I find it very difficult to stop. So I invite you to interrupt. I will take that gracefully. But yeah.
Having said that, I am now interrupting.
Go for it.
What, Eddie? Come on.
Your 5 minutes have expired.
I may have sped it up a little bit. Part of it is, I agree, the lexicon is on display, but you're also building something for normies that don't have a lot of exposure to it. And it's in the 90s. So there's even less, I'm not going to say there's less knowledge, there's less public engagement with it. So you need to layer all that on very heavily. And then hopefully, if you had multiple seasons, you could pull back on that. And as this masterpiece, of course, should have gotten multiple seasons, we didn't get to see that in action.
So, I mean, some people think so. And there are plenty of TV shows that have boasted a rather lukewarm first season. Eddie and I were talking about Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. There are some hits. There are some hits in those first seasons, but generally it is the finding the feet season and delivering a fairly mediocre, palatable quality so that you get as many viewers as possible and you don't offend many people, start using too much in-universe terminology, for instance. And I think that's where I struggle with the sheer volume of vampire dump that is injected into the first couple of episodes, but mainly the pilot, as I feel it's better, much like when running the game, to seed information, keep it intimate, keep it sort of tightly wrapped around a few characters, rather than saying, here's a protagonist who is really, really irritating in the first episode and in a relationship with zero chemistry with Ellen Tigh from Battlestar Galactica.
Thank you. If you hadn't said it, I was.
and
here's Dokes, the wonderful Eric King. Eric King is always fantastic from Dexter. So we get to see the cops, we get to see the love triangle. We get to see the prince, we get to see the Primogen, we get to see additional vampires beyond that. Sorry, the Primogens.
Gangrels.
Yes, gangrels, toreadors. I cut the S off everything but Malkavians.
Were they really gangrels, I ask you? Really?
Well, some people would say that, say not. Those commenters on my videos are very keen to point out and it speaks to the powerful influence of the visual depictions in the vampire rulebooks, because people look at the Bruja in Kindred the Embraced and they say, Bruja shouldn't be wearing suits acting like enforcers. They should be bikers.
Right.
They should all be black American dudes with baseball bats, because that's what Theo Bell looks like in the
Right.
rulebook. And then they say, and Gangrel shouldn't be bikers. That should be the Bruja. Gangrel should be out in the... Well, no. That's actually the one thing I don't take issue with. I really like that the Bruja are undermining the Ventru in a way that is politically interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that they aren't just conforming to the book's stereotypes. Now, it goes quite extreme at points with, I don't know, the Nosferatu with thaumaturgy and so on, but if you are really trying to work that within the Vampire the Masquerade mold, it can still work. It's just an out-of-clan discipline.
Right.
The not conforming to stereotypes is the least of this series' issues, in my view.
I agree. And
yes.
One thing that I find interesting in retrospect, and some listeners we may be going a bit specific, we'll try to bring it back when we can, but
I think our listener can keep up.
That's fair enough.
It was probably me.
True. Is that when this first came out, I know I bounced off it for a lot of reasons. One of them was that the clans were kind of simultaneously family and political unit. And there's only 5 of them. And so, get into, there's supposed to be 7 and blah, blah, blah. But now that Requiem exists, looking back on it, it's okay, actually, I see a much more kind of a Vampire Requiem style structure happening here. And so I think it was smart to cut it down to 5 clans for lots of reasons. Part of which being both Malkavians and Tremere would be difficult to kind of make work on screen, especially in an already heavily info-dumpy episode. The pilot introduces 10 characters with regular speaking parts.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on, and I felt like 5 was a good number to create interesting politics. Now, the show completely squanders that, and we'll go into that. But at the start, it's like, again, that's not the thing that I have issue with. This is very clearly a show that isn't quite sure what it wants to do. Like I said, Chris and I, we watched Forever Night before this. Forever Night started out 4 years before this. Had 3 seasons, 4 seasons?
3.
3 seasons.
It went to, ended, didn't. Well, technically, first season ended for a stint, came back.
Well, right.
Ended again, but got picked up by USA. The greatest network in the world that had all the best late night Friday horror Scream Queen movies, if anyone is of a certain age and remember those.
Yes. And Forever Night is just like, no, vampires doing this kind of stuff is just nonsense, and we're going to lean into that, right? It's like, we have a vampire cop and a vampire DJ, and that's just cool, and we're not even going to explain it. It's just going to happen. And their mythology was just all over the map, right? And now you have a very solid mythology, and I feel like if they had leaned into, but this is ludicrous, I think it could have gone better, right? And so, yeah, of course the Bruja are mobsters. Yeah, that's great. Of course the Gangrel are all one entire biker gang. And the Toreador openly own a club, and there's constantly fights in the club, and yet somehow there's a masquerade that makes sure humans don't notice this, even though everyone on the show knows, right? If they had just leaned into that more, I think, and been like, no, this is just nonsense, and we're just gonna go for it. And you see slivers of that, but the flip side is, you're right. Like, there's this dense mythology, which they do strip a chunk out, to their credit. But everyone plays it so straight. Everyone's playing it so serious, and not even in a melodramatic way. It's just it's very kind of reduced and damped down, and like everyone's kind of just delivering their lines in a pretty flat way. And so it's like, no, you should be like devouring the scenery, right? You should be just going for it.
now I really wish that we had watched Blood Ties before Forever Night, just to give you another point of reference. If anyone remembers that little gem,
I actually don't.
it's a cop and her vampire buddy who helps
Oh.
her on cases. I want to say it's a show was made in Canada in the 1990s. I may have watched a lot of vampire television, so let me say. But that would have given another solid base to see how vampires are being portrayed, then compared against Forever Night, and then contrasted with this.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult now, given the sheer proliferation of vampire media post Underworld, I guess, that to look at this in any way charitably.
Right.
Because even though I think shows like True Blood had peaks and troughs, it's a consistently well produced show. Even if you don't necessarily like what's on the screen, it's well produced.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And and maybe this is a question of my taste. They do it quite well with keeping the spotlight focused on a bare handful of characters and going through character journeys until the seasons start expanding out. Now, oddly, the show, when I was watching Kindred the Embraced, because this is the first time I've ever seen it, I never sought it out before. And I regret that, because I would have put material from this in Beckett's Jihad Diary.
Right?
I think it's maybe one of the only vampire touchstones we didn't put in Beckett's. And yeah, when I was watching this, there was a show I was comparing it to in my head, thinking, if you'd done it like this, it would have been so much better. And it was a really odd show to go for. It was Mortal Kombat Conquest.
Oh my God.
Okay, you have to explain that one.
Which is a show I imagine the vast majority of people have never seen. It was a show, I guess, along the Hercules and Xena style of, a new adventure every week. But it had a central trio of characters, only one of whom was in the video games. And every single episode, they would encounter a different part of, I guess, the Mortal Kombat universe. And occasionally, Shang Tsung would reappear from, every other episode, and Shao Kahn would always be there in the background. But there is a Scorpion episode, there is a Sub-Zero episode, and so on. And so if I was wanting to expand out and slowly reveal to people what Vampire the Masquerade is via Kindred the Embraced, and clearly this isn't what happened, they don't slowly reveal anything.
No.
It would be starting with, start with the prince, start with the cop Jagoff no one likes, and I don't know, pick another character, Eddy Fiori, so you actually get a different perspective on things. If you want it to be all male at the front, it is the mid-90s.
Right.
And slowly they are occasionally having to work together, even though they don't like each other, because there's this threat coming in. Then you can introduce a Tremere, because it makes sense as a novelty. It's one of the ways I don't actually object, for instance, to the way the Assamite is portrayed. It's a bit exoticism, but it's the same exoticism as the blood alchemy. And the fact that they don't do that, I guess, steady expansion of the world, and instead just expect you to consume it all and then be along for the ride, makes, for me, the series is completely the wrong way round.
Yeah.
And again, I'm talking about failings. And I think that's one of the biggest ones this show has. If it had been more like Mortal Kombat Conquest, a series that also only had one season, it would have been a true triumph.
So in short, though, for people that may not be familiar with that, they should have taken the MCU approach over the DCEU.
Yes, definitely.
Where they go one solo hero and person to build on, rather than here's a team, go forth with them.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been a much better analogy than Mortal Kombat Conquest. But
I enjoyed the journey, Matthew. So that's what I want to say.
I mean, no one else would.
That's what we're here for. I am here to help the common viewer and listener jump on to these unusual side tangents that you'll take us on.
Chris
And then
says, never
Eddie
having
is
done that
there.
before in the past.
Of course not. I am the epitome of professionalism on this podcast. I do all the tech work behind the scenes. I am the person that updated Matthew on all the steps of the podcast. I just did not bring him in unknowingly of what to expect, because that is my job.
So another things that are lies. So we talked 20 minutes. I'm going to briefly give some context for the show as a whole before we dive in. What's that? Matthew alluded to it. This was a show that was options from the tabletop role-playing game by Aaron Spelling's company because he wanted to move into supernaturally tinged soap opera. Aaron Spelling primarily did a lot of primetime soap operas in the 80s and 90s, is what he was kind of known for at the time. We have talked briefly in the past that supernatural soap operas is not a new genre in the mid 90s. Dark Shadows is something that we've alluded to and maybe make do at some point. But
I don't know how I feel about talking about Johnny Depp, though.
Oh God, I forgot about that. I had literally removed that from my memory until now.
Thank you.
So
that's what I'm here
thanks
for.
that. There are lots of reasons why the show did not last the episodes it had. But one of the big ones is, of course, the actor who played Julian Luna died tragically during the production.
So I know a little bit about the show because I watched it week to week when it aired.
So did
I'm not going to lie. And I enjoyed it at the time because I was a young Chris and I didn't have my established taste in. And it was just nice seeing vampires and something on the screen that I've played before.
Absolutely.
And and I may have done a little reading on the side, but a lot of it was that also the show was built almost in a Sopranos model with how you have a primarily male cast, your female or femme presenting cast are primarily only love interest and they're obsessed with only being in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of divided your audience about what they were going to look for and try to engage with in the show. Because if you're trying to present a Soprano style show, but with a soap opera lens over it, you're losing viewers there. I'm focusing more on the viewer count they would have gotten.
Right.
And the show itself was kind of canceled after first season. And then there was talk about it coming back. And that's unfortunately when the actor who played Julian died, was that during that time period.
I thought it was while it was being shown. That was my mistake.
I think it was when they had convinced people that maybe we could give it a second season. That's when he unfortunately passed away.
Okay.
In a motorcycle accident, I think.
Yeah, it was a motorcycle accident. I know that part.
And I think any show that stars the Soul Man should definitely not be aired, and that is someone who should not be working.
The Soul Man?
Oh, you've never seen that atrocious, racist piece of shit movie called Soul Man, starring C.S. Thomas Howell, who pretends to be a black person to go to affirmative action to get into a college because he didn't have enough grades to make it? You didn't sever that movie from the 80s? That I
couldn't see through the Nosferatu makeup to
no. He's the cop. He's Frank.
Oh, yes. No, you're right. I'm getting my actors. Sorry, I'm insulting Daedalus.
Yeah. How dare you?
If we're going to quickly throw on C.S. Thomas Howell, good grief. You bring your best to a pilot, don't you? You're thinking that I want steady income. Acting is a tenuous profession at best. No one likes to work the regional theatres. You want a show with a season, maybe 2, regular income, get a bit of rent saved up. He just walks into this and is as wooden as any performance. He might as well be scenery because people basically move around him and he occasionally reacts. His acting is beyond awful. In the first episode, again, it's weird. The first episode is such a bag of shit because and again, it's in a tale as old as time. series shows do find their feet as they go on. The actors find their rhythm, the directors too, and the
Right.
writing with it.
Mhm.
And the pilot has some performances that are serviceable to strong.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that Julian Luna is really the character we care about, despite some odd choices throughout. And some of the other Primogen as well are interesting. But yeah, Frank, Detective Frank, I wish Eric King had been the lead cop in this. I wish we'd had a confident, a vocally confident African American male performer leading the cop duo, and have Thomas Howell be the ghoul or whatever he is. You know,
Right.
Yes.
he can do the vacant stare. He doesn't even have to act. Apparently, he just has it. And yeah, Eric King, I think again on the things that could have saved the show if Eric King had been the lead. Boom. And you also hit another demographic there.
Yeah.
So
Yes. Which, sorry, one more point, Eddie. I think that before you go on, I don't have any proof. I haven't read this, but I want to say that after the pilot, I feel there were rewrites. So that's why Julian became the focus of the show over Frank.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is almost definitely the case. It's one of those things where Frank is positioned as the protagonist in the first episode. People go back to the writer's room. They have a crisis meeting.
Right.
These are the rushes. This is what we've got. But look at the prince. I mean, he's supposed to be the antagonist. I think we can save this.
Right.
And then it becomes Julian's story.
Since we're talking about the pilot, I'll just go ahead and recap real quick.
No, you wanted to give back history. I'm sorry to have interrupted and totally derailed you. So please.
As I am, but I will keep doing it.
Well, if we apologize for it, it makes it better, right?
Exactly.
No. Finish your thought, Chris.
No, you were saying, show. Right. I'm surprised that Tori Spelling wasn't in it. That is my last joke before you go on.
So episode 1, the original Saga. A police detective, Frank Kohanek, has learned that vampires exist, but doesn't realize he's surrounded by them. The businessman who he suspects is a mobster, Julian Luna, is the prince of the San Francisco Kindred clans. Frank's girlfriend, Alexandra, is Julian's ex and also a vampire. When she reveals herself breaking the masquerade, her life is forfeit. That's a pretty short summary of what happened because, as Matthew points out, there's a lot of nonsense that happens in this episode.
Yeah.
I think they call it melodrama. My fellow vampire
it's not
writers.
Melodrama. It's
you
actually
should know
not
about
good.
Melodrama and tension and horror and suspense. I, sirs, am insulted by both of you and how quickly you throw this show under the bus.
I'll tell you what melodrama is. Blowing the episode's budget on a sweeping helicopter shot that lasts the first 3 minutes while using day for night lenses. I mean, they really got a nice shot of the bay. Because of course this is pre-drone, so that costs a bit, and right. I bet they had to do it a few times as well, because the footage, those actors on the rooftop when this episode first starts, and you've got the vampires brawling on the roof, as the helicopter cameraman is flying in towards the rooftop, you can actually just about see them waiting there for their cue. So there's someone just behind one of the air conditioning units or something who shouts, "Okay, the helicopter can see you now, action!" And then they start running around, but they're not even chasing each other at that point. They're just meandering about, because I'm guessing they probably thought, no one's going to be able to see it, it's supposed to be dark.
Right.
And so they run around in figure of eights until the camera gets close enough to them that you can. And then they think, "Oh shit, we'd better pursue each other now." And if that was the best take, I would hate to wonder what the worst ones looked like.
Well, I'm sure whoever the director was realized that they watched the first Star Trek motion picture and they gave a sweeping 10-minute view of the Enterprise. And they're like, that was epic. If I did the same thing for this opening of the show, regardless of Frank's acting, People will love this series.
I mean, that was a natural leap to make, wasn't it? I'm
Right.
sure the director was thinking of the motion picture while planning the rooftop brawl.
And the worst part is, like, it's not a bad instinct, right? Like, starting in the middle of an incident, and then figuring out throughout the course of the pilot how the incident got here, while the context stuff is not a bad draw, right? And certainly murdering a guy who bursts into flame on a rooftop is kind of an interesting way of doing it, because
Yeah.
something you have to kind of what this show is trying to do, and it's doing it so badly, is the show's Kindred the Embraced, and they always use the word kindred. They actually don't say the word vampire until like 2/3 of the way in the show. I actually checked. And none of the vampire characters ever use the word vampire. It's always the mortals that use vampire. And so the idea is mystery of who are these people? What's going on? Even though it's blatantly clear what they are, right? It's like not at all a mystery. Oh, they're vampires. Like, anyone who coming into this cold, I'm pretty sure within 5 minutes going, okay, they're vampires.
No, I have a very incisive point about that, which I won't get into now, but
Okay.
remind me when we get to the coroner scene.
I was actually about to move to the coroner scenes,
Well,
but go ahead.
You're saying that they'd say they're obviously vampires, but if vampires run around the day, wouldn't even the common person go, shouldn't they burst into flames?
And then they did.
And then they don't. Later in the series, they definitely do not.
But in this scene, Stevie Ray bursts into flames.
Yeah, the trick seems to be if you've got a weather vane stuck in you, you will burst into flames. It's like a propellant. The sun does nothing except make you feel uncomfortable. But if there's a satellite dish embedded in your chest, at that point, well, all bets are off. It's like a superconductor for solar energy.
I also like how his head was perfectly fine, but the rest of him was burning, so he could
say,
"Tell my brains I said nothing."
That was something I noted as well. They made the effort of putting the flames in the foreground of the camera shot,
right? Which
and it looks better than an Adobe effect, but you can also see none of the flames are touching him. So at that point, I'm wondering what is on fire. If the flames are in front of his head and we're seeing it from the side, has the inferno spread from his body to the rooftop but left his head immaculate? Because at that point we're talking about a saint. We're thinking, if this is a man who spontaneously combusts from the neck down, but his head is perfectly preserved, that's the kind of thing in the Dark Ages that relics would be made of, and we would be getting into another interesting show, a CAD file, maybe. Just think what would happen if Frank was more like CAD file. Things would be a hell of a lot more interesting. That's why.
So, possibly it's not vampires burst into flame, but it is a fact that, as you're mentioning, the weather vane, in fact, was so hot that it caught his leathers on fire.
Yes.
And it was the leather that burned. That's why Stevie Ray died.
That's what they say. When you buy patent leather, there's a little label on the inside. It will say to you, do not put in contact with weather vanes.
It's true.
Or other, forged iron implements. I think whether you're talking about steel, it might be a slightly different rule when you start diluting the iron content. But yeah, raw iron. It's like a fairy thing.
And it's really funny because, again, we watched the pilot for Forever Night where LaCroix got staked by a metal stake. And there was a whole plot point of saying you can't kill a vampire with iron. And then this show comes 4 years later and you absolutely can kill a vampire with iron, apparently.
Oh.
I could go on, but
scene.
You want to go the quarters? We could go the quarters because I could stick at this point for like another 10 minutes. But.
Well, okay. Let's stick with this for another 10 minutes. Because
we're still on the first scene.
Because we have, while at least two of us have already excoriated Frank for just being, there's an odd moment in this opening scene where Frank is, if not likable, animated, and it's when he has his buddy cop moment with Sonny. It feels a bit Lethal Weapon-ish, He's even calling Sonny in the scene baby, which seems very familiar.
Yeah.
But they are in San Francisco, and I know it's a very liberal town. So let's say the police detectives in San Fran go around calling each other babe and talking about how they want to take down Luna because he's the head honcho, the big cheese, the big kahuna, and all this. And Sonny saying, he'll jam your badge up your ass sideways. And while it sounds terrible, because it is, I'm sorry, I've used the word terrible, I've been struck off. It is buddy cop banter.
Right.
And that means there was something they could have done with these two characters.
It just goes away.
And it from the moment they are, I think it must be PTSD. Let's assume it was written in that the moment they see Stevie Ray, not the WCW wrestler, burst into flames on the rooftop, they no longer have that buddy relationship. They can't get over it. They've seen a man burst into flames. They can't explain anymore.
Are you telling me that literally when they saw Stevie Ray, that's when shit got real?
I was waiting for Booker T to yes, an NWO invasion.
God.
Onto the rooftop, Spinneroonie his way toward the gangbang and says, wait, that's not my Stevie Ray. Spinneroonie's back down.
And then we get to...
You realize we now had to do a wrestling podcast episode because...
At some point.
I think the podcast is now a big fan also of John Cena. At least me after seeing Peacemaker.
Yeah. It was good in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as well as Rocksteady.
Wow, he was. All right, Eddie, you want to keep us on point.
No,
you want to talk about the corner scene.
I was going to briefly digress and say I could see an entire short season of movies that happen to have wrestlers as the primary cast members. We do like Scorpion King and
God, I'm not going to watch Scorpion King again.
Fair enough. But yes, so Matthew, the asshole coroner scene who is baffled by this corpse and really, really shitty about it for some reason.
Well, there's a few things that I loved about the coroner. And not, but first to go back to the opening.
We cannot escape the gravity of this scene.
Yes. My final thought, as Jerry Springer would say, may he rest in peace, is the descent, the two Bruja jumping off the rooftop like the other guys. I mean, that's where my thought immediately went, the opening scene from the other guys, where they would go into slow motion and My Hero would start playing. So that's a meme I made after that. But my head, after going through the funny stuff, was, okay, how much falling damage would they take? Because Bruja do not have fortitude as an in-clan discipline.
Right.
And I don't think they have the age yet where they would have developed this discipline themselves.
They could have had a lot of stamina to absorb the hit, so then they could use celerity to run and leap into the water.
It is admittedly only bashing damage, so they could have soaked it immediately upon landing. I will grant you that. I gained the impression this was something like a 6-story warehouse building, so it's still a pretty sizable drop. But okay, the coroner.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few things that I was a big fan of with the coroner. One, the coroner was angry that the cops didn't know what accelerant was used. Right. Because Sonny, Eric King's character, and Frank were both saying to him, well, we don't know what was used. We don't know why this person went up in flames. And the coroner says, and why not? Well, because you're the fucking coroner. It's your job. Take samples, toxicity reports. I've seen these shows. I know what you're supposed to be doing. We bring the bodies to you. You give us the answers.
That's how this works, man.
And obviously the coroner's got that staple, I'm a bit creepy persona of I don't trust what this guy does with the bodies when no one else is around.
Exactly.
That's certainly an insinuation. The other thing I was a big fan of, so number 2 with the coroner, was how he flubs a line and course corrects. Yes, I got granular with this. And course correct, and it never gets edited out of the episode. So he says, while he's recording, seems to be some kind of spontaneous burning of living tissue. He wants to say flesh.
Right.
And he would have got away with it too.
Yeah.
If he hadn't. If it wasn't
for those
for
meddling kids.
meddling cameraman.
What if they decided they wanted to do a Lynchian move and leave in the mistake? Maybe that is how. I can't even do that. You're giving
Was David Lynch even Lynchian in '96? I don't even think so.
Yeah,
I think Lynch has been Lynch since '80s.
Okay.
See, I would have accepted. Okay, so let's take that from a different angle. Maybe the script said spontaneous bursting of F and then ... corrected to living tissue.
Right.
So maybe the coroner's supposed to be a bit taken aback. Spontaneous burning of living tissue. You know, he catches himself, he pauses, but that isn't how it's acted.
No.
It's spontaneous burning of living tissue.
Living tissue.
And my final favourite part of the coroner, which is when we revisit him and he gets murdered.
So dead.
By Daedalus, who must have been patiently waiting in that slab, in that mortuary freezer for a long time for his moment. I mean,
what else are you going to do as a vampire? What else are you going to do as a vampire? You've got eternity. The sun doesn't kill you, so obviously you got forever on top of that. You have to find something to amuse yourself with. He's probably sitting in there for hours thinking of different ways he could kill the
Rubik's Cube.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
He's like, this would be the most dramatic way. But what about this one instead?
Yeah, so what I really liked about that scene, and it's not the coroner in particular, but it's all the scenes surrounding the coroner, was, so Daedalus has been waiting in that mortuary. He doesn't know when the coroner's going to be walking by, or maybe he's got Auspex. Let's say he's got Auspex. So he knows. The coroner has got his back turned to him. So he slides the tray out, climbs off, and stalks up behind the coroner and bites him.
Right.
Now, this goes back to your point, Eddie, about how the character Frank realizes he's surrounded by vampires.
Yep.
No one else seems to know. Mm-hmm. And yet, vampires in this show, for the most part, only ever seem to kill people by biting.
Right.
Which is clearly for the viewer to emphasize this guy's a vampire.
Wait. No, Alexandra did die from a nail, a very sharp nail.
But if I was a sneaky Nosferatu assassin primogen with self-conscious issues regarding my baldness, I probably wouldn't be the spoilers. I wouldn't be going around murdering people with my fangs. Right. I would sneak out from the morgue and slot the guy with a knife, or have a silenced pistol, because someone's going to find his body and is going to say, weird, where's all the blood gone? Which I'm fairly certain Frank says. When you could just as easily have just gone across the throat, and then it looks like some deranged maniac has got in. I know, I'm looking for logic where there is none. But it's a perfect trifecta. Everything surrounding the coroner is just so delightful. A wonderful main course to follow the starter of the rooftop fight.
This, if you'd seen Forever Night, then you would actually get to see a coroner that is the exact opposite of this, who is Natalie, that is like a beacon of light in that show. And that was refreshing compared to this very dated stereotype, even in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. He's just like, not quite necrophile, but heavily implied to be one.
Yeah, well, by the cops, and I'm not sure I trust the cops. Not Frank, anyway. Maybe the coroner could have been a perfectly decent guy, except for the whole, so what accelerant did they use?
Well, what's hilarious is, like, we're 5 minutes in, but, like, Sonny looks like the most competent character on the police force.
Yes.
And he turns out to be Ventrue. And so it's just like, of course
Turned out to be a slime ball on all accounts for Cop Worlds and Vampire Worlds.
Yeah.
Big spoiler, in case you don't know that for some reason.
So Julian's mad about Stevie Ray being killed. Archon tells him to knock it the fuck off.
He says, they're hoping you will frenzy, and looks to the camera, smiles and winks.
Right.
Look for that on page 23 of your rulebook, kids, and then turns back to Julian Luna. Scene continues.
Yeah.
Julian Luna then says, they staked him out like dead meat and burned him in the sun like a beast. And turns to the camera, smiles.
It's clunky.
I know I'm picking holes in every damn line. This could be a 10-hour podcast. I won't do it constantly. However, so let's look at that line. Let's examine the line, shall we? We're all writers here. Okay. They staked him out like dead meat and burned him in the sun like a beast.
Right.
Okay. They staked him out like dead meat. Not often you stake out dead meat. I suppose you may do if you're trying to lure a predator, you're doing it like bait.
Yeah, sure.
So staked him out like dead meat and burned him in the sun like a beast.
Is that a common thing you do with beasts, is burning them in the sun?
It's an entire sentence that actually makes no sense when put together. If you put a nice full stop in the middle, they staked him out like dead meat, clench his fist. He burned in the sun. And then maybe like a beast. But no, it still doesn't work, does it?
Is there any reason you're making this entire movie, every time you quote things, to be like a 40s noir mystery? Like, every time you do it, I'm seeing Humphrey Bogart, like with Frank and Sonny. Right there.
They staked him out like dead meat, see? And burned him in the sun like a beast.
That would be better, actually.
Vampire Noir.
Vampire Noir, yeah.
I mean, that's the next RPG the three of us make. Right.
And then there's about 75 minutes of Frank and Alexandra, where she does this thing which it's early vampire fiction, so I'm trying not to ding it too hard, but it drives me up a wall when vampires make all these plays on words, and it just keeps happening. It keeps happening. It's the I don't drink wine, problem. And it just keeps going and going, and it's just like, you are a police investigator. How are you not picking? Oh, that's right. You're terrible at your job. Never mind. You're Frank.
Yeah. I suspect Frank is an alcoholic on amphetamines.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. It is close to her basically leaving the restaurant with him, pointing across the road to where there's some kids playing basketball. It's nighttime, of course, and she looks at him, laughs, and says, "Children of the night." She doesn't say that.
But she might as well.
All right, let's take a minute to break down Frank. So then maybe we could stop beating up poor C. Thomas's house. How old is Frank supposed to be? Because they're referring to him as like a grizzled cop.
He's a maverick.
He looks to be about 12.
He plays by his own rules.
At one point, because I wrote this down, he was asked about he apparently had a previous wife who committed suicide.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm talking about the character here, by the way, not the actor.
He also apparently has been with Sonny for a while. They have been partners for a while, and has somehow missed the fact that he's a vampire. But regardless, so he's been in the force for he's been in the force for several years.
He looks 12.
I agree.
He acts like he's 6, but he looks 12.
Yeah, he does. The thing is, it wouldn't have worked with an older, grizzled maverick cop either, because then I don't think you'd believe the almost teenage romance that he has with Alexandra. It's a weird mix. They try and put too much in the character of Frank, in all seriousness, now, without demeaning the man's performance. As a written character, he has too much weight to carry on his own.
Right.
It's the kind of thing you could have spread across Frank and Sonny. Again, it maybe if Sonny wasn't a vampire or a ghoul or anything like that. And I don't think Thomas Howell is competent, and I'm not sure enough people would be to carry that kind of burden. Because if you're older, if you look like a grizzled, unshaven, maverick, loose cannon cop, no one's going to buy the romance with Alexandra unless it is a noir style setting.
Yeah,
right.
I don't know what she sees in me, but An old cop like me with a Pearl Harbor wound in my hip. But
Right.
All right. I'm just gonna want to hire you now, Matthew, to like read a noir book, audiobook of some kind. That's
And not a good one too, like a Mike Hammer novel or something.
yep.
I also love that it's weird moment because again, this is mid '90s on Fox, which was still trying to be ostensibly a big network. And so we had this weird prudish moment of a woman who's clearly doing drugs in the bathroom, but we don't see what the drugs are.
Oh, you see a little. I think you see a fraction of powder.
It's very cropped out of shot. Like if it's on there, it's purely by accident. Whereas
was
like
probably the
nowadays, you would have like
actors
had a
then.
close up of her doing the line before we pull back. You know?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Again, if this was HBO, she'd be shooting it into her veins,
Right.
naked probably. And then you'd see the sex scene. And that's another odd thing where with Vampire the Masquerade, the role playing game, and it's interesting. Segue. I was running a Victorian Mage game recently, Mage the Ascension, another World of Darkness game for the listener. And I ran into a very interesting thing that has occasionally come up in vampire games too. And that is when the characters were no longer capable of casting spells, they were too weak to do so, basically. Right. There were various effects that prevented them from doing so. They felt utterly paralyzed as players. Like, there were still things they could have done. They could have thought their way, socialized their way, punched their way out of the situation, but they thought, as soon as I don't have magic anymore, I'm powerless. And that's a really interesting thing, because you get the same thing in Vampire occasionally with disciplines. And with Alexandra, you get it in this bathroom scene where she is seducing the lady with the cocaine to get a bite to eat, essentially. And she uses dominate or presence, let's say, because her eyes flash a color. The seduction was going absolutely fine without the use of the discipline.
Right, yeah.
The woman even offered her, would you like some of my dope? Basically.
Right. Which is polite, only polite thing to do, you know.
Yeah, I mean, sharing's caring and all that. And Alexandra could have just gone, yeah, I'd love a line, and then maybe, make things a bit more familiar. But instead, no, it's just, fuck this, I don't have the time for a 30-second seduction. You're mine. And...
Well, again, I think this is, again, slightly time because, I mean, this is right around the time where Deep Space Nine is doing their female romance episode and getting hammered for it. So it's a woman couldn't possibly seduce a woman unless a magic power is involved. And that just very much feels like that. Whereas you're right, like it was clear, like her and the woman in the bathroom had way more sexual chemistry than she and Frank did.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like I want to watch these two. I want to watch that episode for the rest of the thing. And it's like, she's now the main character. Let's follow this cokehead and see where her journey goes. Right? I mean, I'm into this.
You're making assertions about that woman's character. For all you know, she could have been on a bad date, just how Alexandra was, and needed something to help her get through that date.
I mean, it could have been aspirin. Who knows?
I mean, honestly, maybe Alexandra should have had some coke. It would have helped her with Frank. But
on the subject of terrible romantic chemistry, it's not helped by the music, is it? They leave the restaurant, head back to I guess Frank's place. I assume every cop has lots of billowing drapes in their apartment in San Francisco. It gets very warm.
That's fine.
And the swelling, plinky, plonky Days of Our Lives music as they are, I don't know, I can't even call it seduction. Let's call it rotting. It's like a child let loose on a Casio keyboard. It's almost the farty horns from the basement music in the Resident Evil director's cut in quality. It's it's Room levels of romance, and obviously Room, we'll probably come back to Room later when we look at episode 3. But for certain visual reasons. But the famous sex scene where Tommy Wiseau is essentially making love to a woman's navel based on his positioning is strongly reminiscent here. And I know this is basically, it's almost daytime TV. They're not going to be going for some HBO.
For anyone that doesn't know what The Room is, because The Room is a very specific reference, what is a 30-second recap for our listeners of The Room?
A movie made by an author, writer, director, actor by the name of Tommy Wiseau, who lacks the talent and capacity for criticism to make anything that's actually worthy of any kind of qualitative appraisal, and therefore only stands up as a parody of itself, that the creator has subsequently gone on to claim was deliberately a parody and has reaped great rewards for doing so. Sadly, all subsequent movies by this director, writer, actor have been uniformly shit.
Right.
So that's The Room.
Right.
Which
but not
also
The Room
had
Brie
an
Larson.
abundance of money, if I remember correctly, to be able to go in to buy cameras that other people are forced to rent.
The mystery of Tommy Wiseau is practically a meme unto itself at this point. God, is he an alien? Is who knows?
It's just live in non-linear time. Yeah, exactly.
But yes, it was an odd sex scene to go for, and only highlighted how the two of them must have had a very unpleasant. In this scene, if I was to get into the heads, I'm imagining neither of them is enjoying this sexual encounter.
Right. I do want to note here that it's made explicitly clear in this episode that what happens to Frank on a biological level is because he made love to Alexandra.
I don't mind that. I don't.
No. Well,
I don't mind that concept.
Except jumping ahead briefly, we have Daedalus having sex with a woman, and nothing happens to her.
I think that was.
He also specifically references though that he had her blood or something. Also, there's one other line that pops up in the pilot that is added that Daedalus didn't do.
Fair,
when
but
Daedalus did what he did.
It was a weird emphasis. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. No, I've got a theory for that, and it isn't a pleasant one. That Daedalus being an ancient Greek, and either he's adopted that name or he is an ancient Greek. I'm not going where you think I am, Chris and Eddie. I'm thinking that, to put it bluntly, he slipped it between her thighs. And never consummated the deed in the traditional way. See, I didn't go where you thought I would.
I see.
And that's what Daedalus knows. He's never learned another way. And so she isn't affected in the same way. But because she's never revisited our person who can only sing House of the Rising Sun.
We're not in episode 3 yet.
I know.
We may never get there at this rate.
Yes. Because she's never revisited, for all we know, she does develop Frank-like symptoms, and if that's the case, God help her.
Fair, even though Frank's symptoms are vaguely defined at best.
Now that you've thank you, I was going to go into that. So Frank is effectively a ghoul, we're going to say.
Yeah, they don't use the word.
What? He's immune to dominate, possibly?
That seems to be the only ability he has demonstrated in the episodes we watched. I think in one of the episodes we skipped, it also implied that he can run a little faster than normal, but I don't know if that's true or if I'm mixing it up with Forever Night.
Yeah, I don't see. Again, I think it maybe get a bit squicky. I've not examined it in huge detail as a concept, but the idea of if you, let's say, make love to or with one of your ghouls, that they then become immune to your mental disciplines, isn't on its own a bad concept. It adds a level of romance to Vampire the Masquerade, or romance, I don't know if it would be constituted as that, but a sexual element that isn't there presently. But who knows? Renegade are releasing a book on seduction and love in Vampire the Masquerade, and I have every confidence that it will be a hit if they put in content from Kindred the Embraced.
There we go.
But if Frank was going to be the protagonist of the show, which I've already made my opinions about the actor well known,
I think
that
you're right.
would have been a great ability to give a protagonist, so that the mental powers of the vampires, the kindred, don't work on them.
Breaking the masquerade, Chris.
It looked like it was building up to something that, you're right, probably got pivoted away from. So we have Lily, Julian, and Cash talking about Eddie Fiori's plans to take over the city.
Fury.
And then the Brujah drive up, do a drive-by with a fucking phosphorus rounds.
and everyone just stands around after.
Yes, everyone's like, oh, it's another drive-by with phosphorus rounds. It's San Francisco.
As someone in a vampire game that has done this, can I tell you that it is so much joy? Like, you can rewatch it now.
RPG accurate scene in this whole show.
This was my favorite scene in the entire pilot. It reminded me of games I played. I loved every second of it.
So there's a few things to note from this scene as well. One is that apparently Stevie Ray, God rest his soul, seems to have embraced every gangrel in San Francisco.
Yes.
Everyone says, Stevie Ray was our sire. Wow, prolific. He must have been favored by the prince. Now, what I liked about this scene is Luna goes up to Cash of Tango and asks Cash, Cash the gangrel biker, will you be my guard dog? Your sire is gone. And Cash thinks it over and eventually agrees. Now, I like it because there's a tendency, especially in games of vampire, that every character is constantly trying to be top dog. Mm-hmm. And it's good to have characters who can accept that I'm not a leader, but I'll be a fighter. And Cash, while he brings absolutely no emotion or much of substance to the entire show, does work as a guard dog, as a sheriff or bodyguard. I've no issue with that. Now, I actually wrote, and I hope you don't mind the language, and I didn't write this in context because I have notes. The cop is a fucking cretin. This is before I'd learned Frank's name, and I just wanted to point that note out. Now, yes, the scene where they phosphorus bomb the cafe, let's call it the cafe domain.
That was the Haven, wasn't
it? That may have been the Haven.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things. One, the San Francisco Police Department response time is bloody good. If I'm going to have my restaurant bombed, I want it to be in San Francisco because Frank and Sonny show up there. It must be within 5 seconds of it occurring because Luna hasn't even got back into his car. And they just walk straight up. And I don't believe anyone tips them off. This could be a Fiori to Sonny thing, which maybe.
I think so.
But but why would Sonny have said to Frank, hey, let's swing by the Haven?
Because Sonny is a working sort of both sides. Right. So anything that's going to potentially hurt Luna potentially puts him in a place of power. And Eddie Fury could have called him, if I can't have a show starring Sonny, I wanted a show starring Eddie Fury. I wanted to watch that show into the ground.
Yep.
You mentioned before, Matthew, about we're jumping ahead a little bit, but not having all vampire characters pet dogs. It's genuinely nice to see a vampire character who's just not that bright.
Yeah.
Right? Eddie Fiori is not the mastermind. He has everything is a nail. He has a hammer, and that is what he's going to use. And I kind of respect that on some level. Like, I kind of want to see a show from his perspective of like, this is the day I'm going to kill Julian. Okay, I got to revive Julian. No, this is the day I'm going to kill Julian. Okay, I got to revive Julian.
The things they do with Eddie Fiori in this show is probably the highlight of the entire show for me.
Yes.
The actor whose name I forget, something Thompson maybe, Brian Thompson. He there's a Mortal Kombat connection. He played Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and of course the alien bounty hunter in the X-Files.
Yep.
But Brian Thompson's portrayal of Eddie Fiori is a Brujah who is on one hand ultra confident, despite acknowledging he lacks certain skills.
Yep.
And then he's confident about what he can achieve, but he lacks confidence in his own ability to do it.
Yes.
And again, we'll explore this more if we ever reach our third episode. But especially when he's around his sire later on, he is almost childish in his, and if this doesn't work, I'm going to die, aren't I? And so you get that even as far early as the pilot episode. He is the strongest part of this entire show.
I completely agree.
And
so.
I think the idea you point out, Chris, of Sonny playing off both sides is a perfectly reasonable thing for him to do, because if he is an astute cop, a good reader of personalities, he can look at Luna and say, well, this is this guy's failings, and he can look at Eddie and think, well, this is this guy's failings. I'm going to take advantage of that. That's decent storytelling embedded in this show.
Yeah, and I mean, so okay, we're in episode 1. Eddie Fiori has murdered your bodyguard and just did a murder attempt on you. At the end of this episode, is Fiori bloodhunted? No. Is he kicked out of Primogen? No. Is Burhan in any way punished? No. This is all Julian Luna's fault, because Eddie Fiori is making it super clear what his intentions are.
Yeah.
What proof do you have that Eddie Fiori killed your bodyguard that you can take to the other Primogens to say, Fury did this, we must now kill Fury?
And that's something that it's almost frustrating about this pilot, because you can see the political web, right? It's like, if Aaron Spelling had cared more about the politics and less about the soap opera, there could have actually been a really interesting kickoff point for the politics of these 5 characters and how they interact with each other. Because, I mean, we see Lily is clearly that Luna has most of the Primogen on this side. He's sleeping with Lily, even though she's mad at him. He's got Daedalus on his side, and he just elevated Cash. So it's like there's an interesting political thing, like, okay, it's Eddie Fiori versus the rest of the Primogen, but then we can slowly start to spin those away from Julian as various things kick in, as the later plot line of Cash and Sasha, and then Lily getting jealous of Luna's things, and Daedalus growing hair. All of these things slowly spin him away from Luna as he eventually, and then Fiori takes advantage. That was all really cool, but it gets lost in some of the subplots here, and it just comes across like Julian's not a very good prince, which is frustrating, because you're right. Like a line of Fiori just going, "What proof do you have?" And Julian going, you got me. That is totally one of the laws that we absolutely have, that I need proof.
Yeah,
something.
It's a Primogen council that is not capricious. And again, it's not a bad thing to see. It shows that they do actually have traditions they abide by, despite the fact in every live action role play of Vampire the Masquerade, they're going to be as selfish and capricious and turning sides at any given time. That isn't bad writing at all. And Eddie Fiori turns it back on him and says, well, you're the one who is protecting someone who's breached the Masquerade.
Right.
And yeah, he's right. That is one of our laws. So fuck you, Luna.
Right.
We're on Luna. Before we move on, as 2 veteran vampire writers and general content creators, what do you think of Luna as a prince, and how incredibly human friendly they made Luna?
One thing I was trying to keep in mind while watching this is that this was probably written and produced right around the time 2nd edition had been launched. And the role of the prince in Vampire the Masquerade has changed pretty strongly. Like, for example, people have dinged this and said, they call Cash his bodyguard and never call him a sheriff. And it's like, yeah, but the concept of a sheriff didn't really exist until the live action game came out. It never existed in the tabletop game. And the prince as this powerful elder that manipulates absolutely everyone wasn't really a thing yet in Vampire the Masquerade. So from the slice of time we're looking at, Julian is probably a pretty accurate representation of how a prince probably was perceived in Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with him having praxis in San Francisco as it's presented, mainly because while he doesn't seem to have much political power, he's definitely not the most successful of schemers, though he has his moments. He clearly abides by a certain rule of fairness, which isn't terribly interesting from a plot standpoint. But if you want to keep the tides low, and and you want San Francisco to abide by the masquerade and the other traditions, then that's not a bad prince to have. Especially if when things get bad, you can oust that prince pretty easily. It makes sense to have a soft figurehead if you've got your Archons and maybe your Lilies behind him.
Right.
Daedalus is a bit more nebulous and a very different character from one episode to the next.
Yes.
And Eddie Fiori is clearly primed for wants the big seat. But because he stands in contrast, Luna stands in contrast to Fiori, it can very easily make the rest of the Primogen think, well, we'd rather be tied to this soft-handed prince than this burning our havens up with phosphorus grenades potential usurper.
Right. We covered some of the scenes that follow after this already, so I'm going to jump to Sasha crashing Julian's great-grandson's funeral. The introduction of Sasha.
What a character.
And this is such a weird, it's a weird scene for a lot of reasons. Making out with a corpse, certainly I'm surprised got on television in 1996.
Is it still incest if they're dead?
Yes.
Well, she wasn't sitting on his face.
But
she was...
So how many of your relatives have you given just like a big kiss to?
None, my lad. That's my final statement on the matter.
But I mean, it's so like, Sasha's such a fascinating character for me because, like, on the one hand, it's such an interesting character arc, right? Like, because again, minor spoilers. Ultimately, she falls for Cash. Cash falls for her. She gets embraced by the Bruja, and it becomes kind of a Romeo and Juliet dynamic because she was tapped to become a venturer. She gets embraced as Bruja in power play, and that puts her at odds with both Luna and Cash.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic, and the actor is certainly doing her best with this. Okay, you're going to be transgressive. You wouldn't be, shock. But this whole scene it feels so weird because
it's the most. Not the most, but one of the most soap opera parts of the show. The prodigal grandchild appears at the funeral, crashes it quite literally on a motorcycle, and
but I mean, it's I think like we mentioned before, like none of the actors are playing melodrama except for Sasha.
Yeah.
Right. And so her melodrama would be perfectly in line with a more traditional soap opera or a Forever Night or whatever. But it jars so much, particularly against Julian's performance. Now, what's interesting is that the guy playing Julian does you see him kind of start bringing his game up a little bit next to her. Like when he's against her, he adds a little inflection, like his subdued thing. You start to feel the undercurrent of anger in his portrayal when he's playing against Sasha specifically that he doesn't have with the other actors. So, like she's upping his game, which is fascinating. She's like in some ways one of the more stronger personality actors on this show, and she's the wayward granddaughter.
Yeah. I find her character truly irritating in the first episode, but I think that's intentional.
Right,
she's supposed to be. Although her age, what age she's supposed to be, is much like Frank, all over the place. At one point, she's in high school, or she's being groomed for high school with the nuns, and then later, almost certainly not. But one thing we missed, and we're still on episode 1. is the wonderful scene where Luna and Lily are getting it on. And I think it's Lily in this scene.
Did I skip that one? No, you're right. I just skipped the one where Archon creepily watches them.
Yeah, Archon watches them. and then walks in on them.
Yes.
With a sort of sorry to interrupt you mid-nookie master. Because at this point he's very seneschal like. Yeah, and he's going around in his sort of smoking jacket, looking like a Vincent Price host. And he says, and he stares right up the Toreador's asshole. This is the He doesn't raise an eyebrow. Let's talk about Clan of the Road. But no, they are basically mid-copulation. He walks in. It's probably the most revealing, the most sexy. No, it's not sexy. It's a bit gynecological, I guess, how it's just so up there. And he just stands there. Sorry to interrupt you, Prince. Your grandchild's dead. I mean, just imagine you are aware that someone's grandchild has died or any relative has died, and you know that they are at it in the next room. You've been watching them. Is it a power play on Archon's part to deliver this news sort of mid-erection?
Yes, but I raise you that Lily, who is a Toreador, should have auspex and is aware that they are being watched.
Oh, I think she probably is. I think that's why she positioned her her ass in that direction. This Archon's thing. It's getting Lynchian again. Archon waits in the cupboard. But yeah, I think
that's the name of my next book, by the way. Archon waits in the cupboard. That's my next book.
Its sequel, Up the Toreador's Arse, and other stories by Archon.
Archon.
Yeah, it's like a Hela character from Catch-22. Archon. He was Prince Archon. Before that, he was now he's Primogen Archon. But anyway, yes. Very impolite is my point. Very impolite to interrupt the Prince and Primogen mid-coitus to say your grandchild's died. He could have waited 3 minutes.
Right.
I'm going to let it go. I will say, though, this scene reminded me a lot, rewatching, of Brandon Roth's Superman hanging outside Lois Lane's house, X-ray visioning her as she went around their home.
Yeah.
Very creepy, very, I'm watching you.
Yeah. So there's a, again, I'm kind of fast-winding through some of this stuff. Julian does mention when Sasha kind of gets brought to the house, Julian mentions to Archon, anyone who embraces Sasha will be killed. Spoiler, that does not happen.
No. He's very soft.
I take it back.
Velvet slippers.
No, I take it back.
Print.
It does kind of happen because
Big bark.
I believe, if I remember correctly, Fiori embraces her, but then he sacrifices one of the other Bruja as a scapegoat to actually die. And everyone knows that's what happens, but it still happens. So it kind of happens.
Yes, Fiori's on. He's outliving his usefulness. He's on borrowed time, Eddy. I don't know. Eddy.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a rogue kindred. Somebody's going to bring him down.
Luna says, goes to threaten Alexandra, sends one of his goons in a car. Alexandra sees him, tells Frank, hey, I'll be right back. Goes, takes the guy, apparently drinks him dry, drives his car to Julian's house, dumps the body on the lawn, and says, hey, don't mess with me. By the way, I didn't breach the masquerade. And I'm like, I respect the play, but that may not be saying the message you think it is, Alexandra.
You asked what a power play was, and if Archon was doing it. No, this is a power play.
You know the post Alexandra Frank love scene that comes up soon
with the wolf on the bed.
Yeah, and Frank trying to shave his face, and he's incapable of even shaving the smoothest part of his cheek and without cutting himself because he is 12, as we know. He's like the Bill Duke in Predator. He's just going with the razor down his cheek. But yes, Alexandra comes up and licks the shaving foam and blood off his face, which is quite a toxic combination. I wrote it down as feeding preference barbicide, because you can actually play that word both ways, listener. You know, so this is a clever play on words. Barbicide would, of course, be the murder of a hairdresser.
Right, exactly.
Why didn't we put any of this shit in Beckett's Jihad diary?
If I had known, I probably should mention it. So now we have a scene of Lily's going to go talk to Eddie Fiori, and this is number 2 favorite scene, in the gym.
Yes, yeah, he's doing his curls.
Of course,
there's so many layers to this. Like, one, it's like, okay, that actually makes no sense from an RPG standard, but we said before that that's not how we should be judging this, and so let's put that to the side. So vampires just pump iron. Okay, that's just a thing in this world. Great.
Yeah.
So Eddie Fiori, the head of the Burha clan, sees another Primogen walk in, and he tells his buddy, "You need to go outside so I can talk to this sexy woman in the gym by myself." And that Burha's like, "Bye, boss," and just leave. So already, Eddie Fiori has better control of his clan than Julian Luna does because he can actually and not have anyone watch him.
Eddie Fiori doesn't skip leg day, and he has the respect of his clan and fellow Primogen. Why wasn't he Prince?
And there's this again, Eddie. I think his name is Brian, the actor playing him.
Yeah, Brian Thompson.
He's doing some amazingly subtle stuff here, right? Because like Eddie's talking, and the whole time you see him, he's like positioning himself to like kind of flexing. He's clearly showing off to Lily, but it's not in any of the dialogue, and she's not having it.
Yeah,
and there's some great non-verbal acting happening here that is nowhere else in this pilot between Eddie Fiori in the gym with Lily. And I'm like, why is this the scene where the extra level of acting comes in?
Yeah, the thing is, I don't mind Lily being glacial.
No.
Because I guess that. So there are episodes where it doesn't work. And again, don't know how much of this is acted, how much of it's directed. And so in this scene, the fact that she is utterly unresponsive to him flexing his pecs, basically, to putting on the gun show, that's great. Yeah. It means she is a certain kind of Toreador, a certain kind of kindred. She's not going to be won over by such, petty pomp. But yeah, in other episodes, she's like a whiny, lost lover who wants to get back with her boyfriend. So,
right.
Yeah.
But again, it's like it just really reinforces like we've already said, which is like Eddie Fiori is the hidden gem of this show, honestly.
So, talking with both of you makes me realize that something I may have thought about before, but I will now vocalize, is that Archon, since he chose Julian, specifically chose Julian because he was so weak, and when he wants to be Prince again, he'll get rid of Julian.
Oh yeah. I took that as undercurrent of because like Archon's like, hey, I spent 100 years getting the city under war. I just need a break, so I'm gonna put this guy in charge, and then when I decide that I want to be in charge again, I'm gonna take his head off, diablerize him, and take the seat again.
There's it could be the case. I mean, I could certainly see it being the case. I think he's quite a lot like to a Baldur's Gate 3 reference here, and a Baldur's Gate 3 spoiler for the next 10 seconds. He reminds me of Withers / Jurgle, being the Lord of the End of Everything, the god of death, destruction, strife, before Bane, Merkel, and Baal became it. He basically voluntarily hands over the seat, but knows at some point his time will come again. And they are both sat back characters who, are quite content to let this play, this passion play out, and then amid the ruins, Archon will step up and become Prince Archon. Except, as we know from the final episode of the season, which I did watch, that will never come to pass.
No, sadly. Because Archon died.
I'm surprised that was your Baldur's Gate 3 reference and not the one about the bear and the wolf where I was going.
Okay, so then we have the conclave scene. And again, if more of the show was like this, I think it would have been better because like the idea of all of these plots come to a head in this meeting. We have Eddie trying to make his power play. Daedalus then walks in with Stevie Ray's corpse with an unspoken, yeah, we know you did this. And then in the middle of this, Lily's like, oh, and by the way, Alexandra broke the masquerade and we should murder her. And you could see Julian like doing the mental calculus of like, okay, how do I play this? And then finally realizes that he's been backed into a corner and he has to call for Alexandra, the blood hunt for Alexandra.
Yeah.
Like, that was a moment where I felt like, okay, I see the potential in this show in this scene right here. Like, if this had been everyone has their soap opera nonsense, and then it comes back to this conclave table, and then everything hits at once, and you want to see which way it ends up going, that could have been a strong show. But the problem is that there's not enough time the Stevie Ray thing is just forgotten for 30 minutes before the show comes back. Oh, by the way, this guy's corpse. And it's like, hey, they must have been sitting with this corpse for like days.
Yeah, never turned to ash.
Right, yeah, just kind of still there.
Especially his head. And
Lily, like, she has a valid point, but it is very much coming across as, oh yeah, murder this bitch because she's my boyfriend's ex. And so it's like it could have been a really cool scene, but because there was so much emphasis on the soap opera stuff, it lands wrong.
Yeah. It's one of television's greatest tragedies.
Not about greatest, but it could have been good, or at least okay.
Yeah. I one other thing then, I've got so many notes on episode 1 and realised we're an hour and a half in. And the thing is, the other episodes I have barely any notes on.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. A lot of episode 1, the rest was like, okay, and everything else is kind of in the context for episode 1, frankly.
Yeah. So the one thing I feel episode 1 was missing was Cash having one of those wardrobe montage scenes. Because when he does become the bodyguard to, I nearly called him Diego Luna, Julian Luna. Diego Luna would have been an interesting prince.
Jesus.
He gives up essentially his gang colours and comes out in black leather.
Yep.
I like the idea of Archon probably sat there. No, too garish. What, tartan, really? And then eventually, yes, all black. That sets a tone. And then, as the Bruja say, gangrels are gangbangers with guns. Well, try finding a gangbanger without a gun, and he probably won't be a gangbanger. How many times can I say that word?
So the blood hunt for Alexandra.
Yes. She has bad strategy, doesn't she?
Oh, God. Yes.
Horrible. And it's so short, and we go back to the fingernail. The fingernail that pops up throughout the entire course of the pilot. We slashed a painting, I think, in this episode.
Yep.
To show you the horror that is aggravated damage.
Do we think Daedalus is a cokehead himself, and the one long fingernail is his?
That is.
Yeah. They all have problems in San Francisco. I've heard about this.
I do also like how Daedalus has whatever skill the plot requires. So it's like, we need someone to paint in the basement. So cool, you can paint in the basement. We need someone to drive a taxi. Cool, you can drive a taxi. We need someone to sit in a corner for 5 hours. Cool, you can do that.
We need you to go out in the sun to put Alexandra on the within view of the Golden Gate Bridge. Fine.
Right. But more to Chris's point, also, like I do like how at one point in the blood hunt, she's literally being chased in the streets.
Well, around a
and
corner.
I'm just like, so
it was in the street though.
Let's recap here. You're being murdered because you're drawing too much attention to vampires, and we're going to solve this by chasing a woman through the streets and murdering her in an alleyway.
In a white gown. I mean, she's... San Francisco
has
is
to
a
be
big
saintly
city.
at this point in time.
Well, yeah, she's really portrayed that role up until now. She has the wonderful line when, after she is caught and Frank confronts her, and I'm fairly certain it's her that says, "I can't give you back the innocence which I took by force."
Yeah.
And again, another winner there. I can't give you back the innocence which I took by force. That's natural. You'd say that before throwing yourself into the bay, wouldn't you? Well.
And then, of course, we end with all through this, Frank's been getting phone calls from someone with a mysteriously distorted voice. We find out that it is, in fact, his partner, and that he is a vampire who is working for Eddy. And in that scene, we also learned that Sonny is, in fact, a Ventru, not a Bruja.
Yeah.
Which is a whole lot of stuff to dump at the end of an episode.
Well, they needed the viewers to come back.
Right.
It didn't work. I laughed so hard when Alexandra set alight. I'm not usually a sadist. I don't like to watch characters suffer. But when she burst into flames, again, emergency services response times in San Francisco. She's on the edge of the Golden Gate Bridge. As Frank arrives, there's already an ambulance queuing behind him. So he knows that she's going to be on fire. So again, we know Sonny called him, but because we actually hear the call. But Sonny doesn't say, by the way, you'll also want to bring paramedics because Alexandra is going to be aflame. But so 2-second response time in San Francisco, best place to set yourself on fire. And then she does what all bodies do while falling into the San Francisco Bay. Max Zorin had the same thing in View to a Kill. Turns into a mannequin.
Yep.
I don't know what it is about the air in California, but when you go plummeting down towards the bay, you just go rigid and your limbs just go all stiff. Or maybe it's the best way to land. Or it's an Auton plot. I don't know.
Unlike Stevie Ray, her head is on fire.
Only her head. Well, there you go. If she and Stevie Ray ever got together, they can make quite a tag team.
Yes, I glossed over the Auton reference. Yeah, you're welcome.
We try to see if we can get a Doctor Who reference in every single episode. You hit our quota, so thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
We've had a Patrick Troughton Yeti. And we've had a John Pertwee Auton.
I almost
but the Yeti was pre-recording.
Oh, was it? Well,
yes, it was.
in that case, yes. Hooray for me!
There we go. I hate to ask this question, but is there anything else about the pilot before we move on?
Well, Frank's homicidal tendencies ramp up to manic at the very end. He enters an uncontrolled state following one bad day, so maybe the Joker was right. He confronts Julian Luna, shoots him several times without cause.
Yes, shoots him twice.
He is still a police officer, but we know, that police officers have their own code for when people need to be shot. He says, let's see. No, the prince says, your morality doesn't apply to us. I am the law among my kind, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Now I'm off to get a clean shirt. You fucked this one up, basically. Because he just cuts off. He says, I'm the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And then wanders off with his shirt full of holes. Comes back a little while later. Had a wardrobe change. You wait there, Frank. I'm not done with you, but I'm not wearing this while I dress you down. It's undignified.
What's
it is
Vitru-esque.
Yes.
He's like, I'm the executioner. And it's like, but the person you blood hunted was literally in your house not 5 minutes ago, and you told her to go away.
Yeah.
So you're not the executioner.
Yeah.
True love.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Well, as we know from the end of the credits, which only occurs in the uncut version, which I believe is the only version that's available now, Alexandra is not dead.
Yeah,
she is just lurking at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay. And so the next part of the pilot I want to speak about is the credits.
Okay.
Before you get there,
yes.
I want to point out, when they made this, they must have obviously watched the pilot to Forever Night, because at the end of Forever Night, the woman that's supposedly killed in that also gives you a shock reveal of being being a vampire, but still being alive.
Yep.
Now you're saying the incredible credits.
Well, I see Mark Reinhagen as the only author credited, which seems legit. Now, the lead executive producer, John Leakley, has a rather mixed bag of credits. I don't know if either of you looked into it.
No, I was curious about that.
So he wrote Spawn, or wrote on Spawn, which really makes sense.
Comics?
I think the TV show.
Oh, okay.
I think, was it on MTV, maybe?
It was, yeah.
HBO, I thought.
Oh, HBO. Before HBO got good. And he was... he wrote a movie called The Prince of Central Park, which had some pretty big actors in. I think it must have been an arty thing. But mostly he's focused on non-fiction books regarding the histories of the Civil War, jazz era, and resistance in Nazi Germany. He writes histories and hasn't had a TV credit since 2016.
I will point out that before he did Forever Night, he did the amazing show Knight Rider 2010.
This is the same guy.
Yes. He was the executive producer on Knight Rider 2010, 2 years before Kindred the Embraced.
Well, there you go. The only way was up stellar trajectory.
The
of
only
John
thing I remember
Wheatley.
about Night Ride 2010 is it was the one where the car was red. That is the only thing I remember about that show.
Well, that's episode 1 done.
Right.
We've spoken about it for longer than the episode lasted.
But again, like I said before, it's like honestly, most of these are now we're moving into relatively more contained plot lines. So anyway, episode 3, Night Stalker.
I raise you this. I am happy to keep going for the hour and a half, but I know that you have more time constraints to me.
Oh, I've no time constraints. I can keep going about this all day.
Do we want to do what Fox did and skip the unaired episode and move directly to the rise and fall of Eddie Fury?
How could
I'm happy to
no.
Night Stalker?
I need to talk about Night Stalker, if nothing else, for one scene. So let me talk about this because oh my god, I have so many opinions. So Cash is ordered to investigate a recently embraced kindred named Starkweather, who turns out to be insane and is totally not a Malkavian. Starkweather escapes and becomes a serial killer again, totally not a Malkavian. During the investigation, Julian falls for Caitlin, the city editor for a newspaper he owns, and Lily tells him again that he's an idiot. Meanwhile, Daedalus falls in love with this human singer named Elaine and uses alchemy to change his appearance, but his quote-unquote horrific appearance gets him confused with the so-called Night Stalker. Starkweather, angry at Elaine for misidentifying him, abducts her dressed as a police officer and takes her to Haven for a showdown with Frank and Julian.
I didn't hate it. I mean, it has a couple of utterly ridiculous moments.
Right.
I mean, the Daedalus stuff is clearly the, oh, Jesus Christ, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Part of this episode. The idea of Starkweather being an uncontrollable vampire probably should have... I think, actually, you know what? Episode 3, despite the fact it was unaired, is really the optimal time to introduce this is what vampires can be like if we don't have a code.
Right.
Because it starts highlighting to the Franks of the world, well, so see, people like Luna are actually necessary. So that's fine. I don't even mind the fact that Starkweather isn't a Malkavian. There's allusions to his potentially being a child of Cash, aren't there? I think because...
he makes a comment saying a dark woman in the asylum embraced him. So
okay.
They leave the door open for a Malkavian.
I must have missed that line because I remember Cash being asked, do you know who embraced him? And Cash basically says, a gangrel, but no one knows who, and he looks shifty. So I assumed that, well, either Cash knows who it is or it was Cash, but fair enough.
I agree this is a good place for the episode because it also gives us a chance to have Cash do something other than be Julian's pet hanging out at the mansion.
He's actually half decent in this episode. I mean, like, because honestly, if you don't watch this episode, which again, week to week I didn't, I was like, Cash is useless. And this one, he's actually, yes, he's run over his head by Starkweather, but he tries. He's like, no, I'm going to get arrested so I can go to the asylum with him so I can keep an eye on him and try to keep him under control. He doesn't, but it's not through a strong effort. It's because Starkweather's just a little ahead of him. That's really it. So it's like, I really can't fault Cash in this episode, which is rare.
So I can. And while I agree his character has something to do, I don't think he has nearly enough charisma or screen presence or emotion behind anything that he's saying to actually carry off the weight of what he's responsible for. To the point,
Cash as written, not Cash.
Well,
the character.
The point that it makes me wonder. It really does. Whether we spoke about earlier in the first episode, people going back to the writers' room and saying, you know, this Frank guy, he can't be our lead anymore. Makes you wonder if halfway into the Night Stalker, which of course Richard Ramirez, real serial killer, was nicknamed.
Oh, jeez.
They go back into the writer's room and they say, you know what, it's supposed to be Cash at the end who decapitates Starkweather. It would be a nice character arc for him. But we like Luna. Luna's the protagonist. Let's just drop Cash 2/3 of the way in. He's done his investigation bit, got nowhere with it, and all of a sudden Luna is the protagonist again. And I get it. I understand. That isn't necessarily what happened. I imagine it was written like this from the start.
Right.
And Luna is definitely the star by episode 3.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But they undermine their own efforts by not giving a character like Cash an actual satisfactory arc. He's basically the sheriff, you pointed out. He could be the one to bring order to the force.
Yeah.
And instead leave it to the prince. Of course, it should be the prince who decapitates rogue kindred.
Right, like you do.
In one thought, though, it makes me think more of power levels from a game perspective, where Cash might be your 13th generation newly made vampire who is now
Mm.
appointed to be your sheriff, which means you're good for this very small select window of things.
Right.
Yeah, if we assume he's good at investigation and riding a bike, but not much else, then fair enough. That's where he's dumped all of his ability points.
Right.
He just isn't very good in a fight, which isn't great for a bodyguard.
You give 2 rounds for the prince to figure out what to do. It's your job.
Yeah, it's okay. You've got fortitude inherent, so you know what? You soak up some aggravated damage while I run.
Yeah,
that's your job.
Yeah.
You know what? You could be 15th gen for all I care.
Yeah, you'll do well in an asylum. Yeah, you do the asylum gig. I'll go to the Haven.
Yeah, well, yeah, boy.
Yeah.
So okay, so yeah, right. We've got to talk about Daedalus, right? So.
Yeah.
This is one of the huge. I mean, this is one of the few times where I actually agree with fandom. Like, this was just done wrong. Daedalus is not in any way, shape, or form horrific. I'm okay with the narrative that just because you're unattractive means you're Americally evil. So I'm like, on one level, I'm okay with that. But the problem is, everyone on the show treats him like he's horrifying.
Yeah.
And this episode is the worst example of it, because at one point in time, he literally takes off a wig, and the woman goes, "Oh my God, you're horrifying," and it forces him to jump out of a window
into
of
the daylight.
Baldness. In the daylight.
By this episode, the daylight rules are off. It should be noted. Gone. But so obviously in Vampire the Requiem, and one could say in V5, the Nosferatu are more unsettling and uncanny, and they provide an aura of discomfort and unpleasant and all that stuff, rather than just being out and out visibly hideous, which is fine. I don't mind that. I actually like that as a concept.
Yeah, agreed.
And you could even say that is Daedalus's concept until you get to how people respond to him.
Right, exactly.
You're right, people are looking at him like he is Quasimodo. And he is just a bald guy with extended earlobes.
Yeah.
And I don't think they necessarily had to give him amazing prosthetics or dollar store prosthetics to make him look hideous. All they had to do was make people act like he was creepy. Or even have him act creepy, because I have seen that actor in other things, and he can do creepy. But instead, he is always like this, my prince. I am so cursed. I wish I was not so hideous. I will take this unidentified demoxenil to let my hair grow out.
I have one dotted thaumaturgy, and by God, I'm going to use it.
The path of the hair shall rise again.
So yeah,
I would say that I think part of it, though, is a budget saving measure for the show itself.
Yeah,
sure.
Because if you had him look as horrific, I think, as they looked in that edition of the book, you would have to do that for every other single Nosferatu that also showed up.
Yeah,
and you would have lost some of those viewers that you wanted to engage with the character, because they would have automatically been turned off by the look of the character.
No, completely agree. This is one of the cases where I argue it's fallen between two poles, because if they had the benefit of something like a Requiem to go, we can just make him creepy, and then we don't have to do any prosthetics, but he, like you said, he walks weird, body language is off, and people reframe their language to be, he makes me uncomfortable, rather than, oh my God, he's horrifying. He would have been just fine.
Yes, spray him down before every scene so he looks a bit greasy and oozy. Whenever he trails his fingers over things, he leaves a trail of KY
worm
jelly
tongue.
or something like
Great
that.
Worm tongue from the movies.
It isn't... I know we're litigating something from 1996, but it isn't that difficult. And you do have to wonder... Mark Reinhagen was involved in this show. I know he only had limited involvement because studios and whatnot, and his own interests.
Right.
But how much say would he have? How much influence would he have? How much could he have seen? Would they have said, "This is really cool. You're going to love this, Mark. We've created our Nosferatu makeup. We'd love to show you. This is what we're proudest of." And he says, "Oh, great. I'm really looking forward to it." And he goes to the studio, and it's a bald cap and earlobes. And does Mark enthusiastically say, "That's great, I love it," or does he say, "That's terrible. You've killed my child"?
Right, and also some of this might be. I know there are stories and other shows of where something looks great until it gets on camera, and you're too far in to change it. And so maybe it looks fantastic in real life, and everyone's like, "Oh, this looks amazing," and then you get on camera, and it's just like, "Oh, it's just a pasty guy in a ball cap."
Give him contact lenses and fangs.
Right.
That's it. Literally all they had to do. If they wanted to go the visibly hideous route, make his eyes a weird color and give him 2 odd front teeth. It might make his pronunciation strange, but that's what looping is for.
Right.
Thank you, because I was going to put out in Fright Night, they realized that you can't have your actor talk through fangs because it sounds comical.
Yeah.
Yep.
At that point.
Anything else thanks, Stalker?
The dramatic show off between Frank and Starkweather?
Was it dramatic?
Question mark.
I mean, it was rather perfunctory, wasn't it? They just had to get rid of Starkweather. To the point that I think it would have worked better if he had just disappeared, because then you have a potentially recurring villain.
Right.
But I often think that about a lot of CW shows as well. They'll introduce a comic book villain with years and years of history, and rather than hedge their bets, they will just kill that character after one appearance and then think 4-5 seasons in, shit, we'd love to bring Count Vertigo back.
Yeah.
And we've killed not only him, but also his sister.
When in doubt, just bring in the Condiment King.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would work in a new Suicide Squad, maybe.
Calendar Man.
I think I enjoyed in the 3rd episode. There was an awful lot of times when Frankel, Luna's actor's British accent would seep through.
Oh, yeah.
And I wasn't put off by this, although I don't think it was intentional. I felt like that was a good way of showing that your prince is cosmopolitan.
Yeah, honestly,
I don't mind an accent that veers all over the place when you've got undead creatures.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the few places where having a dodgy accent actually works, unlike, say, I don't know, The Boys, which I'm going to keep picking on because that accent was awful.
You say that all you want. I know that Butcher's accent is authentic because I have never lived there and I have never visited. So I, of course, realize with all my American forthright knowledge, that is 100% right.
You bloody blooming wanker.
Right.
The core blimey, Mary Poppins.
Oh my God.
Once Daedalus has the wig on, to go back to the Tommy Wiseau room reference, he does look like Tommy Wiseau.
Tommy Wiseau, yeah. As soon as you said the room, I was like, oh my God, now I see where you're going with that.
I mean, he has the same kind of pasty complexion combined with the same sort of lank hair, and somehow that is supposed to make him madly attractive to the love interest Elaine. I think the only thing that could have made that episode almost more archetypal would be if Elaine had been blind. Because I think I've seen so many TV shows and movies where but she could never love me, but thank goodness she has no eyesight. I mean, you could really twist it around. If you wanted to put Daedalus as an evildoer, he causes an accident that blinds her, and then she can love me forever. Now we see that Daedalus is actually a monster. Yes, now, she still has a singing voice. She doesn't know that I'm horrible. I can get her.
That is a dark version that would have them grappling with their humanity. That is a totally different show that you're making.
Yeah. This isn't Kindred the Embraced.
But the other thing is this episode very clearly for me shows the two paths the show could have taken, and it's trying to do both, and it does both badly. Like if the entire show had been Daedalus and Wig level of we're just going to lean into how ridiculous this is and play it straight, it could have been fantastic. If the entire show had been we're going to do vampire serial killers, it could have been fantastic. But instead, it's these things both coexist, and there is no way of reconciling them, and we're not going to bother to try.
No,
it's like in another show, I would have said that it speaks a level of confidence, but it frankly just feels like the show doesn't know what the hell it wanted to do.
If we ever do a They Came From the World of Darkness RPG, yes, the Nosferatu can offset their weakness with a wig or false nose.
Absolutely.
A pair of Groucho Marx glasses, nose and mustache.
A fedora and a trench coat,
Yeah.
But you're skipping over the gem of this episode, the City editor, where they introduce Kelly Rutherford, or as I know her, aka Dixie from the Adventures of Briscoe County Jr.
Yes. And she is trying her damnedest with this part.
No.
I was actually going to talk about more because honestly, we see more Caitlin really in the next episode. But yeah, I mean, they try to make her the tough cookie investigative reporter. But it's also hilarious because they for a moment lampshade it because Frank goes, "Aren't you a city editor? Shouldn't you be handling?" No, I get my hands dirty, and just never explain again why the city editor is doing all of this stuff. But the show's kind of aware of like, yeah, we know this doesn't work, but we're just going to go ahead and go with it. And it's like, I respect that on some level. It's like, yeah, just own the fact that this stuff makes no sense. Just embrace it. Pardon the pun.
I feel like... Sorry, Chris, you go.
No, go ahead.
I feel like she could have come in as a decent replacement for Frank if they'd killed him 4 or 5 episodes in. Yeah. The idea of a cop investigating the Kindred isn't working out. Let's have an investigative journalist do it because it fills some of the same ground. Not only that, it's not a man, but they botch it because she is another love-struck woman in a cast of love-struck women.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And also, like, if they had played with the whole, Julian killed Alexandra for doing the exact same thing he is now doing with Caitlin, if they had done something with that, because it is the exact same plot line, just gender flipped, it's like that could have been cool too. It's like, let's recognize the hypocrisy of Julian Luna doing this and getting away with it just because he's the prince, right? And there's a thread of that we see in the next episode, but it's not as strong as I think it could have been.
Do you want to jump to the next episode?
I do want to jump to the next episode.
And I would also like to know how the San Francisco PD explains a headless corpse.
Reasons.
In a nightclub. We'll put that in the cold case file.
We do know how Sleepy Hollow handles that, though, which is badly.
Well, just transport the body. I'm sure it's not far.
Episode 6, The Rise and Fall of Eddie Fiori. Lily is jealous of Caitlin and sends up PI to take photos of Julian and Caitlin together. Cyrus, Eddie's sire, pushes him into hiring an Assamite assassin to kill Julian so Eddie can become prince. Eddie and Cyrus stage a talk with Julian at the Haven, while Sasha, recently embraced by the Brujah, struggles with her feelings for Cash. Julian visits Caitlin, but unfortunately the PI ends up capturing the assassination attempt against Julian on film. The PI tries to blackmail Lily, but she kills him and attempts to get the negatives left with Frank at the department. Manipulated by Lily, Frank then gives copies of the photos to Caitlin, and she shows them to Julian before breaking up with him. Julian confronts Lily, and Eddie exploits the schism to get her to side with him with his play for Prince. The Assamite again attempts to kill Julian, and Eddie accidentally kills the Assamite while she's disguised as Julian. Eddie makes his play with the Primogen, thinking Julian is dead. Julian comes back from the dead, confronts Eddie, and Lily kills Eddie with a Kaviki katana, which is the most Vampire the Masquerade thing ever.
This one is definitive A plot, B plot.
Yeah.
There's, obviously a lot of TV shows do it. And it's a perfectly valid way of creating a narrative. And we want our characters to be busy. But Lily's objective in this, I feel, is incredibly confusing and only really develops when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And then she is rather shoehorned into the end as a power player because of the relationship. But the entire PI taking photos, I'm not sure what the PI was supposed to be proving by taking those photos before the assassin showed up.
Well, again, it's
establishing a relationship between the owner of the newspaper and the editor to show that they are journalistically dubious.
That's quite subtle for me. For Kindred the Embraced.
I'm gonna put mine up front. This is the best episode of the series.
Oh, it is.
Oh, no,
absolutely.
Completely agree. That's actually one of the reasons why I chose it. But you're right. Like the whole time she's talking about, because the guy's like, "Oh, you're trying to get an editor and his reporter on," and then she mentions Julian Luna, and he almost doesn't take the job because of the threat of Julian Luna's mystique. So that's fair, but you're right. It gets swallowed because there's so much happening in this episode.
Yeah.
That I can see a path of Lily getting the photos and then going to Julian and saying, "I'm going to send this to the rival paper unless you drop this thing," and then Julian going, "You threatened the masquerade." But that then blows up because the Masquerade is actually threatened, and Lily's like, well, crap, now I have to clean up my mess. Let me murder this guy real quick and then try to move forward. But that gets lost in that.
Yeah, as a result, it's a rather circular plot. It doesn't really get her anything, and that can be told in a good way as that I'm self-defeating. But I don't feel it accomplishes that. Now, the Eddie Fiori stuff, I feel, really accomplishes an excellent arc. I don't even mind the handy katana at the end.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, so much happens, and in this time, I think it's good. Like, they introduce Cyrus, and Cyrus does two things immediately and fantastically. A, perfectly explains Eddie's, you mentioned before, confidence / lack of confidence. Of course he does, because his sire is an abusive asshole.
Yeah.
Great. And not traditionally abusive. He's emotionally manipulative. And perfect. And then separately, as a separate prince. So explains perfectly why Cyrus gets off the hook at the end. He is another prince in a different city.
Yep.
And so immediately a lot of the politics snap into place. And Eddie goes from being this asshole who's been dealing with everyone's shit for giving everyone shit for 5 episodes to a genuinely tragic figure. He's now caught up in this Cyrus's power play, and he's got to play his cards. And in the middle of the episode, at one point, he even goes to Cyrus and goes, I know where this is going.
Yeah.
But I got to keep going. And I feel bad for Eddie Fiori in this. I'm just like, oh. And so that's why it's so frustrating, because like this episode, that and like little things like I mentioned, the Conclave episode, it's like, if the whole show had been like this, right? If the whole show had been, we're going to watch the tragic arc of these characters, and you're not going to realize the tragic arcs until it's almost too late. It's like, oh, that's really good. And again, the actor is playing on a lot of levels, because he's not playing Eddie different. Eddie's been played the exact same way every episode. We're catching up to the actor and to Eddie Fiori.
Yeah.
And so when you contrast it with Lily, who is wildly inconsistent across these episodes, it's jarring, because it's like, because she's going from cool manipulative thing to breaking down because her plan went awry to angry at Eddie, and you can play those ranges well, but it just comes across as sudden, whereas Eddie has been a pretty consistent thing, and it's just, when people talk about how bad the show is, it's like, yeah, but this one episode almost makes up for it.
I would say this and the finale actually work. I know we're not talking about the finale, but they found their stride at the worst possible moment. Edo Ross is the actor who plays Cyrus, and he is he's what you American folk call a character actor. He appears in quite a few. He appears in a heap load of TV shows and TV movies, often as villains, because he has a face for it, and including one of the best episodes of Moonlighting. And
all right, which episode of Moonlighting?
Brother, Can You Spare a Blonde? That's the name of the episode. And he's the Prince of LA. And I completely agree with you, Eddie. He comes across as an emotionally manipulative, a bully. He is an abuser, and Eddie Fiori's gusto vanishes from the room as soon as Cyrus enters it. And occasionally he plays up because he wants to impress his sire, but really he is just a tool to be pushed around by Cyrus.
There's this great moment when he's apologizing for the lack of the conclave table, right near the end, where Eddie's like, I'm sorry, I don't have a conclave table. You can see almost the real Eddie Fiori there, right? He's a little bashful. He's like, crap, I've done it. I'm not entirely sure what to do now, because everything's been pointing towards this moment, and I'm not sure what to do next. And the actors, you can see Eddie trying to build his confidence while he's talking. And again, it's just a subtle thing, because the lines aren't saying it. It's all in the performance.
Yeah.
And so when Lily kills Eddie, I almost feel bad, right? It's like, he could have maybe pulled out of that nosedive, but we knew that's not true because Cyrus is right there the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even that, but as you were saying, he played the character the same way throughout the entire course of the show. And Eddie is always, this is the next step I'm going to do. And then when he gets to that step, he thinks of the next step. He's not thinking multiple steps ahead for how everyone else is around him.
Yep.
But he has enough sheer raw power that has worked for most of the show for him.
Right. And so, like, you think of all this, and it almost makes you forget this amazingly weird scene of, we're going to take pictures of the prince being assassinated, and it's going to, within minutes, hit every major cast member of this episode. It's like, whatever you do, we need to murder this guy so the pictures don't get out. Okay, cool. I have murdered the guy, and now the pictures are in everyone's hands.
Yeah.
Lily, what was the point of murdering
everyone but Daedalus? When Daedalus finds out, he goes on a painting tearing spree. I'm supposed to be the master of whispers or whatever. Why am I the last to know?
You mentioned early on that you like most of the portrayal of the Assamite in the series.
Yeah.
Given the context when it was done. Given like the time period and everything else.
Yeah.
Is there a better way that it could have been executed than what we saw?
In terms of sensitivity, absolutely. And probably, but in terms of this,
speaking specifically the plot, because we all know that
in terms of the plot, no, I think this is an excellent way to introduce something, and I know this will sound a bit, I guess, of exoticism, but it's a way of introducing something foreign, strange, and scary. And I wouldn't personally tie it to a cultural group like the Assamites, but that's kind of embedded at the time of producing this series in what the Assamites are. The idea of having an assassin who they describe them as the Assamites are chameleons. They can shapeshift into anything. They're deadly. Did you know that? To Ed, I think Cyrus is saying that to Eddie, and Eddie says no. But that's really good for me. That a Primogen in this city doesn't know what an Assamite can do.
Yeah.
This is going back to my thing about Mortal Kombat Conquest, the idea of this is the episode where Noob Saibot is introduced as the shadowy assassin, like ninja.
Right.
Everyone's scared because no one knows what Noob Saibot can do. And it's the same as, pretty much the same plot as the Assamite is introduced in this episode. We, the viewers, do not know what the Assamite can do. And what's more, fans of Vampire the Masquerade at this time, the Assamites are still not a widely profiled clan. They have a very niche part of the game, Diablerists and Assassins. And so, yeah, they're cool. They are killers. They are shapeshifters. Maybe it's over-egging it a little, but I think it's a great way to introduce a new clan and then put them back on the shelf.
Yeah. And I will say, you're right. Like, obviously, there's some exoticism and some potential problems in terms of how it's framed, but for 1996 they actually miss a lot of the landmines, right? Like, they never mention what country the Assamite comes from. They never mention it as being anything other than just maybe a clan that came, for all you know, the Assamite came from Maine, right? I mean, you don't know. And also they don't cast a traditionally Middle Eastern looking character to play. It's just two white women.
Yeah, it's a woman. They introduce it's a woman who isn't besotted with one of the protagonists.
Right.
But it is a woman they introduce that they can kill.
Yes, so it isn't exactly a high watermark.
It's not the best. But, I mean, this is, not too many years after Transformers had a country called Carbamia. So, I mean, take the baby steps where you can,
Bigotry in disguise.
And also, like, they don't sexualize her, which the female ninja thing was very bad for. You actually don't see it. You don't get a clear view of the Assamite in her native form very often at all. I mean, she's a tight sweater and a couple things, but I mean, other than that, I mean, she's a turtleneck, and they show her oftentimes, like, in distant shots or in blurry, hard to see action scenes. So they do a really good job of framing her like a monster in terms of, this is how monster storylines are generally shot in this time period.
Yeah,
and show her very often.
As you're saying, though, from the plot perspective, and I'm only speaking of the plot, I myself enjoyed the Assamite being there because it gave you a glimpse into possibly a bag of tricks that the princes have access to that no one else does, or what they can do. That adds a new level of horror onto that character that we see Julian. And Julian's been a pushover But if he has access to all these things, there's no telling what he might have done if they'd gotten additional seasons.
Yep, only a prince can hire an Assamite, I think is what they say
that.
in the show. And that, again, I don't think was ever a thing in the role-playing game, but is a really nice way of adding a layer of power to the prince or whatever.
And there's a great little moment, again, with Cyrus where Julian's like, hey, you can take your child. And Cyrus is like, I'm just going to go. And Julian, like, clearly, it's like Julian knows 100% Cyrus hired Sasmite to kill him, and he is the fall guy. But once again, Julian was been played to a corner. Where it's like, I have to accept this Bruja offering of a murder to try to keep the peace. And so, like, you see this lens where it could have been a really interesting political thriller of Julian trying to navigate and then eventually just going, okay, no, clan war's going to happen. It just needs to go. It's a shame that the downside of all of this is that they do it and they murder the one really compelling character they have on the show. And so it's like, okay, so in all of this, you show what the show could be, but the resolution also shows that you don't recognize who you really have, because Eddie Fiori as a long-term antagonist would have been fantastic, but they pretty definitively murder Eddie Fiori. You can't really bring him back very easily from this.
See, I think they could have pulled the nose up, because when in the finale, Titus Welliver, who is a wonderful actor, I think, just brilliant in everything I've ever seen him in, comes in as the Bruja Cameron. He has possibly even more gravitas and competence than Eddie Fiori. And so that is something they could have built on. It wasn't a done thing plot-wise. They hadn't. But to go back to the moment where Eddie is shortly thereafter decapitated, when Julian disguises himself. The Assamite is disguised as Julian. Julian is hidden. The Assamite therefore gets shot by Eddie Fiori. And as Eddie is commanding everyone to kiss the ring and accept him as prince, Julian enters the scene. There's an inexplicable moment where Daedalus stands up, turns, and goes like that, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of thing. It isn't quite. He doesn't point and make a weird shriek, but he lets out a scream that no one else responds to. No one else is screaming. Why is Daedalus responding in this way? That it is just a bizarre piece of direction.
But
who thought this was a good idea?
It feels like there's a blood bond there between Daedalus and Julian. Because
maybe
Daedalus is unbelievably loyal to Julian to a sickening extent.
Yeah. But like to your earlier point, though, if they had always directed Daedalus, if Daedalus was always doing a weird out of left field thing, I think it would have sold the Nosferatu thing more, right? Like, it's just, this is the guy who's like, come on, I'm just gonna put a wig on this scene.
Yeah.
I'm gonna randomly scream at people.
What's Daedalus doing? He's just jerking off in the corner.
Yeah.
That's just Daedalus. He's the best Nosferatu we've got, and that most of them live in the sewer. So this wig-wearing, randomly screaming, furiously masturbating Nosferatu genuinely is the best of the bunch. So
I will point out that, as we established in the very first episode, Daedalus lives in Julian's basement.
Yes. So. Yeah, along with Archon, who it's they all share the same house.
Great, it's a frat house.
Yeah,
that's what I want to envision.
Butler. It's 3 Primogen living in one abode. Firebomb that place.
And if Eddie was a better antagonist, that's what he would have done.
Well, Lily's often there, showing her arsehole off to everyone.
Boom, problem solved.
Like a proud cat.
I think we're moving into our final thoughts now. Lily is a proud cat.
But we're skipping that Lily goes to Frank and seduces, pity him into something.
Yeah.
They're trying to build a new relationship for Frank into the show with
And again,
Ugh.
like it's just not working, right? Like, I think the actor playing Lily, frankly, just got some bad dialogue because like you see glimmers of it could have been cool, but she's just so badly written. Because again, it's mid '90s Aaron Spelling, so the woman is only there for the love interest. That's frustrating. But playing off Frank, it just really reinforces that he's just not a romantic lead at all. They keep
No.
throwing in relationships, and they're just not working.
And by this episode, it is very clear that he is an also-ran protagonist because, he doesn't have a great deal to do. He doesn't need to be in this episode at all. And, I mean, this isn't the only episode that he doesn't need to be in. And they obviously feel obliged to have him there because he's the first one in the credits, I imagine. And I can only imagine if the actor playing Lily, and another name I do not know, that our prep is always wonderful, clearly. If she was told, okay, Lily, this episode, you're going to be starting a potential romantic liaison with Frank. I can only imagine she goes back to a trailer and feels like a wrestler who's just been partnered with some, you've just been given a storyline. You're going to be putting over The Miz. So, really? My job is to... I've got nothing against The Miz. The Miz is a good entertainer, but my job is to put him over? He's supposed to win? So, what, I'm just a prop for Frank now? So, no wonder she phoned it in. I mean, I'd be looking for another job to see if Melrose Place is still going.
Why we're talking... Go ahead.
I just want to spoofly mention Lily. I think her actress is Stacy something starting with an H. I don't remember her last name. But that scene of her in the elevator is probably one of the most iconic scenes from the series of her looking up with the kill. And I wanted to make sure that we gave that credit because if you Google it, you're going to frequently see that little gif of her doing that, which is a great establishing shot.
No, again, I mean, she's one of those people that, like, I mean, clearly the camera loves her. Like, she looks great on scene. I mean, she has some range there. The one thing, as I was looking up, I was looking up the actor's name as well. I on the Kindred the Embraced wiki, and I found out Lily's last name.
Oh,
Lily Langtree. I'm like,
what?
Really? This is supposed to be Lily Langtree?
How did I miss that?
Wow.
No, well, okay. These wikis, you can't trust them. That's an ENAA Watson piece of sabotage there.
They may have made that up, but still, I was just like, I was not. But you're right. No, this episode, and it's leading to at least my final thoughts, which is that this episode has that iconic moment, has the great confrontation with Eddie and Julian, and shows that I argue that there was potential here. It was massively squandered. There were a lot of bad decisions. Some maybe could have been made if the show was made later. Some probably should never made at all. But suffice to say is that this could have been a decent show. And it's just digging through and finding those little gems in a lot of shit is sometimes frustrating. But this is one that's always kind of stuck with me. Like, I've always weirdly defended the show, and then when I go back and actually watch it, oh no, there's a lot here that's a problem. But it's never, like I said at the start, it's never the stuff that people complain about online, right? It's like, yes, they all have the same disciplines. Okay, but do you really need to get into clan-split disciplines in a soap opera vampire show? No.
It's like people who complain about the Drizzt Do'Urden R.A. Salvatore novels and say, well, a ranger shouldn't be able to do that. Oh, fuck off.
Right.
It's fiction.
Right. You can summon a wolf from a dimensional plane. Just get over it.
Yes. I disagree, though. So my final thought.
Okay, go
ahead. I've worked on Vampire the Masquerade for a long time, as you know, as have you, Eddie, and I know, Chris, you enjoyed your time on it, and I very much enjoyed working with you. You brought some wonderful material to the game. And
thank you, by the way, for not catching some of my jokes that I snuck into the book that I think you referenced later after it had been published.
Oh, maybe I did. I like putting jokes in games. Eddie hates it. My feeling when I got to the end of this watch along was that Vampire the Masquerade and more broadly the World of Darkness is not a property that can sustain a TV show and still feel like the tabletop role-playing game. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you can have a Vampire the Masquerade TV show that doesn't feel like Vampire the Masquerade, the
Right.
role-playing game, or
Right.
Werewolf, or any other World of Darkness game. But I think that, and this will often come up with adaptations of any media, video games especially, video game movies, the vast majority of people who want to see the show are fans of the game. Therefore, they will be disappointed with what's on screen because it doesn't match up to their vision of the game. So while there is a highlight in this series in the form of the rise and fall of Eddie Fiori, and I didn't mind the Starkweather stuff in the cut episode, those gems in the turds are few and far between.
Sure.
I don't think you can judge everything based on Kindred the Embraced. You could. There will be people who say, "Oh, if they threw a Game of Thrones budget, and if they, had mainstay HBO writers, hell, everything, HBO, give it all to Vampire the Masquerade, you'll make something good." I am sure that you would. I am sure that you would make a good TV show. But I don't think you could make a Vampire the Masquerade TV show that is at all like the role-playing game, because the role-playing game does not translate as written to purely visual media. Now, there will be people that disagree with that, especially fans of things like LA by Night, other actual play stuff. But even they would not work performed as TV shows. They work as communal, improvised storytelling experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been a few comic books of Vampire the Masquerade, but I don't think any of them have done particularly well. So
yeah, so I feel Kindred the Embraced could have continued and strengthened in the second season if they had drifted further and further away from the source material. The more they would feel inclined to call upon elements or feel shackled to elements, I think the weaker it would have become. And I feel almost like if Kindred the Embraced hadn't had the Vampire the Masquerade attachments to begin with, it probably would have done better. But yeah, when you immediately shoot 75% of your audience in the foot by saying, yeah, this isn't the show you want, you are basically cutting your own throat out of the gate.
fair enough.
So yeah, I came away from it, as I said, not happy. It was generally it was what I expected, but I was, I guess, disappointed to not find more things I enjoyed from a quality perspective rather than from a mockery perspective.
Right.
It was fun because it was bad.
Right.
And that's not a good way to make a TV show.
How about you, Chris?
I guess my final thoughts are going to be, it was a well-executed 90s television show. Now, having said that, I have two very distinctive thoughts, though. First is that on one level, I agree with Matthew, but I agree with you because Vampire itself is a role-playing game and every single table is different.
Yep.
So it is impossible to emulate that in any form or fashion.
Yep.
Now, my other point is I do believe that if you take the role-playing game for itself with a group of writers, some of them that love the game and people that make television, you could make a true Kindred the Embraced show that's reflective of the game and incorporate all of that material. It goes back to something I think I mentioned a lot on the show, that it comes down to the writers and their ability to execute that vision. But it takes an amount of work that is rarely done. For instance, we can get amazing shows like Deadwood, and Deadwood is not a show with a lot of violence or action that people want to look for. It's a show based on character drama and internal conflicts and everything else. You could do that with Vampire.
Yeah.
And given the time that we're in now with all the different networks, I believe there's one that could potentially execute that show and doesn't need a Game of Thrones budget.
Right.
You can use like super speed, as we saw from The Flash, is not hard to emulate on a very cheap budget, or super strength.
Yeah.
Right.
But it is the writing that comes with it. Then you need the actors that'll do that piece of it. So I believe it is possible. And I still hope that one day we'll get that 10-season show that'll come out of it.
Right.
Focused around, I'm going to bring it back home, the true Bruja. Boom! Out, baby. Boom.
Chris, you can't make Vampire Doctor Who. We've talked about this.
I think the way most of the actors acted as if they were true Bruar in this show.
Thank you, Matthew, for coming on and tolerating this show for our education and entertainment.
It was a delight. Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to speak so much about the pilot.
If people wanted to find you online and talk to you about your Vampire the Masquerade work, or indeed your opinions about Daedalus's hair, where would they find you?
Oh, they can find me on MatthewDawkins.com. I occasionally operate on the hell site of X Twitter as @DawkinsMP. And I'm on YouTube as The Gentleman Gamer, where you can find a bevy of Kindred the Embraced memes in a minute or less.
Or less. And Chris, where can I find you before we talk about what we're going to do next episode?
If you're looking for me, the best place is going to be the Darker Hue Discord. If you want to buy my work, I think IPR is still sitting on all those books I mentioned a few weeks ago. Otherwise, if you really want, there's also a little book I made called Harlem Unbound that Chaosium has a second edition of.
Good, you should check that out. And before I get into my stuff, this is the end of our next season, of our horror season. We are going to do something else for a minute because as of this episode, we now have 100 episodes of Genreless. By the time you're hearing this, we'll have already recorded it. But we are going to be doing a live episode on the Darker Hue Discord. Chris and I are going to ask each other questions. If other people have questions for us, we're going to do kind of an interview question. I already have my questions written. Chris does not know what they are. And I look forward to some of these answers. But
likely surprising no one, I have not written down any of my questions. And I may do it before we go in, or I may do what Chris is known for.
You make it up as you go along. I 100% that's going to happen.
That is my magic. It's my gift. It's my curse.
Do we want to announce our next season now or wait till the 100th episode to do it?
I think we wait to the 100th episode.
Okay, then you'll have to listen to us next week to find out what our next season is going to be. But until then, you can find me on most social media sites as Pugsteady. That's Pugsteady. That's also my website, pugsteady.com. But the best place to find me is either on the Onyx Path Discord with Matthew, where I'm often there talking about our sister podcast, the Onyx Pathcast. Or you can find me on the Darker Hue Discord, generally harassing Chris with what Big Finish has on sale this week. Because we're both big Doctor Who fans. So with that, thank you for hanging out for us, Matthew. Thank you for all of y'all listening for October as we had this fun with the horror genre. And we'll talk to you next week as we celebrate 100 episodes of this nonsense. See you then.
Be seeing you.